Good morning, guys. And this week in math, we are talking about numbers. And you guys are comparing numbers, seeing which number is more or which number is less. And today I have a story about a little boy who wants the same amount as his sister. Everything she has, he wants the same amount. Now, as I'm reading the story, I want you to think about whether it's a good thing to have the same amount, the more amount, or less. Because something happens towards the end of the story where it actually works out better that the little boy doesn't have any. Okay? Right? My story is called Henry Keeps Score. And this is Henry and this is Harriet. Harriet, Henry, called Mrs. Hedges, rise and shine. It's time to get up. And I'm sure your parents say that to you and your siblings every morning as well. Harriet rolled over in bed and yawned. 5 more minutes, she said. Okay, okay, sleepyhead, said Mrs. Hedges. Henry's eyes flew open. If she gets 5 minutes, I get 5 minutes, he said. Henry wiggled down under the covers. No more than 5, or you won't have time for breakfast, said Mrs. Hedges. Down here in the corner it says Harriet 5, Henry 5. So right now, who does Harriet have more? Does Henry have more? Or are they the same? I think you can see it. Right now, they are the same. 5 is the same as 5. 5 minutes later, Harriet smelled something good. So did Henry. They hurried downstairs. Yum, said Harriet. Pancakes. She took 4. Mom, said Henry, Harriet got 4 pancakes. I only got 3. Harriet got more than I did. So Harriet had 4 and Henry had 3. So Harriet had more because 4 is 1 more than 3. Isn't 3 enough for you? Asked Mrs. Hedges. If she gets 4, I get 4, said Henry. Mrs. Hedges gave him 1 more. Said Henry, because his mouth was full. And so Harriet has 4, Henry has 4. So right now, they're the same. When they were finished, Mrs. Hedges asked them what they'd like for a snack. A glass of milk and 3 cookies, please, said Harriet. A glass of milk and 10 cookies, please, said Henry. 10 cookies, said Harriet. That's too much. You can have 3, said Mom, the same as Harriet. Well, okay, said Henry. So Henry wanted 10 cookies. Is 10 more than 3? 10 is more than 3, but Mom said no. Mom said you can have the same as Harriet. That night, Harriet had a pajama party. Judy, Stephanie, Megan, and Wendy all slept over. They had a great time. And look, there's Henry. How do you think Henry feels about this? He's probably going to want something too. I want a pajama party too, said Henry. Okay, said Mrs. Hedges. Who would you like to invite? Owen, Luke, and Ted, said Henry, counting on his fingers. And Uncle Ray. Uncle Ray, asked Mrs. Hedges. Isn't he a little old for a sleepover? Harriet had 4 people, he said. If she gets 4, I get 4. All right, Henry, said Mrs. Hedges. So look, right now they both have the same amount. They each have 4. Owen, Luke, Ted, and Uncle Ray came to Henry's pajama party. and they had a great time. So there's his 4 friends. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, and look, the little dog's sleeping under the bed. So really, he had 5. The next day, the Hedges family went shopping. They started off at the bookstore. Harriet got a book, and Henry got a book. So they each got a book. They went to a clothing store next. Harriet got a sweater, a dress, and a hat. So she got 3 things this time. Henry got a sweater and a shirt. I want a hat too, he said. You already have a hat, said Mrs. Hedges. And you don't need another one, said Mrs. Hedges. Harriet got 3 things, said Henry. If she gets 3, I get 3. Not today, said his parents. Said Henry. Not fair. So his sister got 3 things, and Henry only got 2. Who has less? Which number is less? Is 3 less or is 2 less? 2 is less. That night, Harriet called a friend. I want to call a friend too, he said. Who would you like to call? Asked Mrs. Hedges. Henry thought. Santa, he said. Santa's on vacation, Henry. We'll write to him in December. Then I'll call Grandma, he said. That's a good idea, said Mrs. Hedges. She dialed the number. Harriet made a phone call, so I did too, Henry told his grandmother. I get to make as many calls as she does. Well, I'm very glad you called me, said his grandmother. So they each got 1 phone call. So they have the same. 1 and 1 is the same. The next day, Harriet and Henry went to see their dentist. Harriet spent a long time with him. I wonder why Harriet had to spend a long time. When she came out, she said, I have a cavity. Henry gasped. A cavity, he said. You had a cavity? Yes, said Harriet. Your turn. Now, Henry likes to have the same amount as Harriet. But in this case, I don't know if I would want the same amount, especially with a cavity. Dr. Carey looked at every single one of Henry's teeth. It took a long time, and Henry was nervous. Finally, Dr. Carey patted Henry's shoulder. Good for you, he said. No cavities. No cavities, Henry told Harriet and Mrs. Hedges. You're lucky, said Harriet. I know, said Henry. So this time it worked out that Harriet had 1 and Henry had none, right? Because you don't want a cavity, do you? Yeah, it's not good. That night, Henry's mother said, You were brave at the dentist today. Harriet had a cavity, he said. Do you wish you had a cavity too? Asked Mrs. Hedges. Just like Harriet? No, said Henry. No, 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 no. Just checking, said his mother, kissing him goodnight. Then Mrs. Hedges tucked Harriet in. You were brave at the dentist today, she said. Thanks, Mom, said Harriet. Mrs. Hedges kissed her goodnight. Can I have one more kiss? Asked Harriet. What do you think, Henry? Asked Mrs. Hedges. Henry thought about Harriet and her cavity. Yes, he said, she can. And Mrs. Hedges gave Harriet 1 more kiss. So, sometimes, even though we always like to have lots and lots of things, sometimes it pays not to have any, right? Henry wanted to always have the same amount as Harriet. But towards the end of the story, it was good that Henry didn't have the same amount. It was better to have 0 cavities than to have 1 cavity. So I want you to think of a time when you kind of wanted the same amount as your friend or your sibling, but it actually paid off not to have as many. It paid off to have less. Okay? All right, guys, I'll see you soon.